As you know, cost of living, number one, A1 absolute issue in Australia. And the Prime Minister, well, he either lied or he has failed to deliver on the central idea of what his government could do when it comes to cost of living. This was still up on his Twitter feed, the promise before the last election. The Labor government will lower the cost of living. Reality, of course, it's all gone up, way up, and take anything from insurances to milk, bread, the cost of a car, you name it. It doesn't matter. Every time people are asked what are their main issues, they say the same thing over and over.
It's definitely cost of living. It's kind of expensive to live pretty much anywhere, even this far out east.
I care about most of the cost of living, and we need to change that for everybody in this country.
Cost of living. Yeah, definitely cost of living. It's just gone through the roof.
Can we ask you if cost of living has played a part in how you voted today?
Well, I'd have to live on the moon, wouldn't I? I couldn't say yes to that.
I could fill the whole hour with it, over and over and over again. It's what people tell, not just us, but the rest of the media, constantly. And the Prime Minister, if he is to be believed, and I don't, well, he says he's doing everything he can.
I've already foreshadowed that we'll have more measures in the budget. We work each and every day to do more. That's the focus of the government.
Well, as always, we don't watch what they say, we watch what they do. And according to The Australian today, there will be no major changes in the upcoming budget to help anyone with cost of living. No cut in petrol, no cut in alcohol taxes, no cuts on insurance premiums, nothing whatsoever. In fact, Cabinet will consider new measures to take key services and make them cheaper. So that's the government controlling some of what it charges, but not the tax that it charges on everything else, as well as potential sort of one-off policies, which means they might get more of the same out of the last budget. But remember, the last budget took $1,500 off 10 million people. How many people in Australia would like the $1,500 back as the automatic tax return? Well, no plans for that, despite the fact that we're doing everything we can on cost of living. Government sources say that nothing will trump the revamped Stage 3 tax cuts, which remain the centrepiece of Anthony Albanese's cost of living agenda, despite calls for Labor MPs to be more ambitious. And why wouldn't they want that to be the case? As we've shown you how many times, almost every night. If you're earning $45,000, oh, thank you so much, Albo, I get to keep an extra $15 a week. All the way up to an amazing $44 a week if you're earning over 100 grand. None of which touches the sides, none of which actually deals with any one of the increases that now we've all been made to expect, and expect too much. Now, again, this government has an opportunity to do things like cut petrol taxes, but it chooses not to. Instead, it took the tax rate from 23 cents in the dollar to now 49 cents in the dollar. People paying petrol is a major issue, and I love the argument from the government, oh, well, if we reduce petrol taxes, it would do something about inflation. How? The car only takes so much petrol, which means you'd be buying the same amount, and you only drive as far as you currently drive, which means it would be the same. There is no giant explosion in stimulus because the rake of tax that you take per average car would change. Instead, we actually get, believe it or not, from the Turnbull Times reporting about just how expensive it is to have a car in Australia right now. Now, for the extreme majority of people, it's the only option because it's the one where you can drive yourself, the kids, grandkids around. There's no train station to the local pool, which means you end up in a car to, God forbid, in a free country, go and do your shopping, fill up your own boot and come home. Typical household transport costs rose by 13% last year, the same year where they took $1,500 off you. Oh, but we're doing everything we can. It outpaced the rate of inflation, which was 4.1%. So 3 times was the amount that it was if you own a car. Most Australians do. Drivers in capital cities, they faced 12.4%, literally 3 times the average inflation rate, which is exactly what we've been talking all the way through. The headline stat says one thing. The reality, once you actually slice it up, is very different. Regional drivers, again, even more than 3 times the average rate of inflation, 13.7%. The government's solution, because of course we're doing everything we possibly can, is to limit the number of cars that you'll be able to buy over the next few years. The only ones they want you to buy are electric vehicles, which of course you would still need to charge, and given the high price of power, would increase your overall household power bill. Shh, don't tell anyone. We're doing everything we can. That's why Chris Bowen is obsessed, of course, with electric vehicles as the only solution to everything. But the reality is the highest selling cars, number 1, 2, 3, 4, are either utes or SUVs. In fact, twice as many cars are the first two cars sold as opposed to the third and fourth number of cars that are sold in Australia. And I want to thank my dear friend Tim Blair, who's always razor sharp on calling out BS. He's the man that I've learned oh so much from over the years, certainly about cars, but also on popping the spin. Now, Chris Bowen has said that one of the main reasons why we have to increase the cost of big cars, the big cars that Australians want for work or pleasure, is because the United States has already put these rules in place and it's no different than what they do in the US.
And this is not a radical policy, Mr Speaker. These standards have been in place, and this is where prices have not gone up, as have been in place in the United States since 1975, almost as long as the member for Fairfax and I have both been alive.
But guess what Tim Blair worked out? That's not true. In fact, many of the vehicles that will slowly but surely be banned by the Australian market because you won't be able to afford them are actually exempt from the rules in the United States. Under the initial cooperative average fuel economy, or CAFE rules, pickups were largely exempt. And it's all online if you want to read it. The Washington Post reported just last year, to protect American commerce, work trucks and light trucks were subject to a less strict CAFE standard than family sedans. As recently as 2021, according to the analysis from The Australian, nearly half of Ford F-Series pickup trucks were excluded from the US fuel standards. Bowen's US emissions defence is dead. What a surprise. The same bloke who was touting a $1,000 saving if you happen to buy a new car in the next couple of years by 2028, on the very day that they increase petrol taxes for every other car on the road, is not telling the truth about the rule that he's putting in place. Same as I noticed today, the big Labor talking point is about how expensive the construction of nuclear energy is, and that it's the market that's desperately getting behind renewables. Well, of course, Chris Bowen himself has put $60 billion aside of your money, taxpayers' money, to help subsidise the change to the type of technologies that he wants. So there's no market being decided here. It's a market chasing subsidies. Also, on cost of living, more information around all of this. Again, well done to the economics writers of the Channel 9 newspapers today, because they've put it all together. Inflation, tax are now starting to hit the economy. And we are probably halfway on our way towards a recession. The Australian economy may have started to contract through the final 3 months of last year. And is that a surprise? Because remember, as we told you in December, 109,000 full-time jobs disappeared. In January, the unemployment rate went back up. And I'll have more about jobs in a second. And all of this happened because of a combination of high interest rates, 12 of them under this Prime Minister, cost of living pressures. Oh, we're doing everything except increasing taxes on everything. And the payments that were taken, they've taken their toll when it comes to tax, and it's finally stretching consumers. Some economists now believe the quarter could show a small contraction following the modest 0.2% lift in economic output recorded in the previous September quarter. So remember, to be in a recession, we're already in a per capita recession. We have been for multiple quarters. That's when the household is going backwards, but because of the mining sector, the overall economy is moving forward. The tax take from the federal government continues to go up. But again, you and I suffer. And exactly as it is with the picture of inflation. Oh, it's the lowest numbers in 2 years. Unless, of course, you're talking about rent or insurance or bread or milk, or 3 times the rate of inflation when it comes to running a car in Australia. Now, if the next 3 months, if the 3 months of the December quarter show that our economy was going backwards, then we are halfway to the technical definition of a recession, which is 2 quarters, 6 months of the economy going backwards. Now, we would be in a recession if not for 0.2% in the 3 months before the December quarter. So we are in the per capita recession. The economy was almost in a recession. We may well be halfway towards a recession when those data comes out. Another sign of how things are slowing right now. All just little reminders of the reality. It will burst the Canberra media bubble. Substantial risk to GDP. Why? Because firms are now destocking. What does this mean? It means, say, if you've got a warehouse full of stuff, rather than ordering in more stuff because you expect to sell the stuff you've already got, you just slowly but surely deplete the amount of stuff that you've got in the warehouse, and you don't buy new stuff to replace it because you don't think people are going to want to buy things at the same rate as they had. Perfect example, again, let's go back to December, where it was the best part of $800 million less that was spent in the Australian economy in the month of December compared to the previous Christmas. So an MCG full of people lost their full-time job, and the last Christmas that just went was way below the Christmas that was there before. We now have a scenario at the start of the year where inflation remains high, certainly compared to where it's been in the past few years, and interest rates is a choke of up to $30,000 and above for anyone who's trying to pay off a mortgage, like many people in the major cities, of $1 million or above. Meantime, more bad news from building sites. Sorry to give it to you tonight, but there's plenty of it around. Now, tradies are trying to do their best at the moment to try to finish off a bunch of projects, but there will be a bunch of projects that won't be finished because yet another building company has gone bust. This one had projects in 4 different states. This is on top of the insolvencies that have happened in the manufacturing sector. And anyone who knows, if you're trying to do something in the country, it is very expensive. If you do it with stuff that's imported into the country, like pieces of paper, remember the paper mill in Tasmania? We don't even make that anymore, let alone all the materials that you may well need to build a house. Well, all that has to come into the country. The weak Australian dollar means that the cost of bringing those things into the country, up, but nothing to see here. And also on housing, there was this porky that Jim Chalmers delivered in his first update to the budget in October last year.
The ambition of this accord is big and it's bold. It's an aspiration to build 1 million new, well-located homes over 5 years from 2024.
Million over 5 years, that's 2022. Well, guess what we learnt today from the Bureau of Statistics, you know, that far right-wing think tank that keeps fuelling the misinformation machine of the program of which you are watching. According to data today, just 12,850 new homes were approved for building in January of this year. Now, that number is very similar to the month before, the month before, the month before, the month before, the month before. So the entire number of homes that had been approved to be built last year was 162,000. We ain't getting anywhere near 1 million. That's the reality, let alone the cost of building these houses and finding someone to be able to build these houses. But despite the fact that, by the way, these houses aren't just necessarily freestanding 3-bedroom houses, that also includes all sorts of dwellings, villas and townhouses and granny flats, you name it. Total number of places where somebody could lay their head where they couldn't 12 months ago, 162,000. They claim they'd get to 1 million within the next few years. They will not. They'll be pushing the best part of 500,000, maybe 600,000. But of course, what happens is while the housing isn't being built, the people are still coming in. The huge population that's on its way, with this government doing everything it can to surge the population because more taxpayers equals better government revenue, which means they can continue to spend, and if they move this dollar and they move that dollar and the mining sector keeps going, they can still say they're in a surplus. But there's nowhere for them to live. 1.6 million people come into the country over the next 5 years, which is why the Treasurer said, oh, we'll build 1 million new houses. But do the sums. If in 1 year, it's 162,000, it's going to take, for 1.6 million people over the next 5 years that are coming in, 10 years to get to that number. So for 5 years, where are they going to stay? Maybe the Prime Minister's going to let out the mansion that he's not living in at any one time. OK, you can do 3 months at Kirribilli and then you can do 3 months at the Lodge. Which is why the Coalition is coming in hard on this number. Now, they understand that if there's nowhere for these people to live, and as we told you last night, the rental market is so bad in Australia that there's a lady who applied 150 times for 150 different properties in Queensland. She couldn't find a place to live, so she upped her family and went to Tasmania. There's the bloke who moved, as we showed you, from regional Queensland to Brisbane because he couldn't find a job, but he can't find a house and now he's living by the side of the road. This is the reality of the Australian economy right now. Just this far in front of a recession and half of our way towards a recession, if those numbers show a decline, we'll bring that to you in the next couple of days. Dan Tehan, for his part, of course, says that the Liberal Party understands the role of migration. It's not about race, it's not about religion, it's not about colour, it's not about faith. It's just about literally having places for people to live.
But I can tell you what's too high. 1.6 million people coming into this country over 4 years. To give your viewers an idea of that, that is the population of the City of Adelaide. When we have a housing crisis, when we have a rental crisis, when people can't get in to see a doctor, when we're seeing cuts in our infrastructure so the roads aren't being built to deal with that population, that is too high. I went to the press club not long after the last election and said that what we need is a proper plan when it comes to immigration.
1.6 million people coming in, only 162,000 homes being made in 1 year. It means at that rate, for 5 years, there won't be enough new houses for the new people that are coming, let alone the people that are currently growing up with their parents, with their family, in the share houses, wanting to move into their own homes, let alone the people that want to move out of the one-bedroom unit after they've coupled up with somebody and want to move into a house. There's plenty here. And then one final point here is about jobs. The final part of the picture. December, 100 and whatever, MCG worth of full-time jobs disappeared. The expectations in the budget last year was the unemployment rate, which currently has a 3 in front of it, could well get to 4.5. And the expectation, according to one of the banks today, is unemployment could rise because the number of job ads is currently falling. So more people coming in for jobs that don't exist in housing that is nowhere to be seen. They're geniuses in Canberra, aren't they?